James 5, verse 13. We are at the end of James. We will be in it for a few weeks, and James 5:13 through verse 20. We'll get our scripture video here in a minute, but we are just locking in on verse 13 today. But a quick global view. So, okay, we've got a few different types of Bible readers in life. You know, maybe you're the one who reads the Bible every day. You know, it's just what you do. Maybe you're the one who reads the Bible, you know, when life gets tough or when life gets boring and you pick it up and you read it. And then there's probably some in here that don't read at all, which I would encourage you to read, but it's not to put you down and out, and that's just the three kind of Bible readers there are. For the first type, the astute Bible reader, James 5 may resonate with you. All right, you've probably read this. You're probably very aware of verses like, "My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth," this is verse 19, "and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins." I mean, it's a very motivating verse to go out and rescue the lost, and it's a great verse. And then you have this verse 15, "And the prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven." Another great verse, a lot of talk, I don't want to say controversy, but a lot of different sides on that verse, on healing and where does healing come from and how does sin play into it. All right, great. "Is anyone among you suffering?" This is today's verse. "Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise." Great verses. This thing is loaded. We're just locking in on that verse this week. The question, though, you've got to ask when you read the Bible, and it's one I try to instinctively ask, but this will help govern your interpretation. I think it's a good question, is when you open up the Bible and you start reading, do you have any preconceived ideas, notions, thoughts, interpretations that you are bringing to the passage, right? So today we're going to learn about verse 13 and talk about it. You'll pick up some knowledge, you'll pick up some thoughts. Next time you read verse 13, you're going to come to the table with some already generated ideas and thoughts, some which could be right and some which could lead you astray. So that's the question we want to ask. One question I asked as I was reading this was, what's a preconceived thought or notion that I have? And one of them was, this is written to the church. That this passage is written to a group of people. But then I started looking at the pronouns, and I saw maybe that was not the initial intent of the writer, which would be James, or ultimately the Spirit of God. I looked at the pronouns, and I just started highlighting them. Let me read them to you. "Let him." Verse 15, "Is anyone cheerful? Let him. Is anyone among you sick? Let him." And then he talks about the elders. "Let them," verse 16, "pray over him, anointing him with oil." Then it goes on, "Pray for the one who is sick. The Lord will raise him up. If he has committed sins, he will be forgiven." Move down to verse 19, "My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back." Then at verse 20, "Let him know." Well, I mean, that one is actually very interesting. Who's the him on that one? The rescuer or the lost person? Well, that will be a very interesting message here in a few weeks. Let him know. So it's interesting that this passage actually begins to focus on one person. The sufferer, the cheerful, the sick. And what we need to do this week and the following weeks is you almost need to imagine that God inspired James to write this for your sake. For you. James is closing out his magnificent book on the gospel in you and how it works out in you by hitting on these seasons of life: suffering, cheerfulness, sickness, wandering, in how you connect back to God. That word connect can be really swapped out with the word trust, the word faith, the word relationship. We got to be careful when we use words like connect. We do not want to give the impression that you are ever fully disconnected from God, because God has placed a saving faith in you. You are a child of God through that faith. Your salvation cannot be taken from you. Jesus prayed for you. You read it back in in the Gospel of John, to protect you until you make it home. But this idea of connection is more of this, the word intimacy comes to my mind. I got a best friend, truly a best friend from college named Bill Campbell. Bill's been here because that's what best friends do. They come check out the churches of their friends, even if they're 900 miles away. So he's come, checked out this church. And so what me and Bill have done over the years is we've stayed in contact. We try to make it a point to see each other, once a year. Well, he's got 2 kids, 2 awesome kids. I've got a kid and another one that's awesome. And they're both really good, actually. I love them both. Well, Connor, though, I'll tell you about Connor here in a minute. But he threw us for a loop yesterday. What that boy did at 10 months. My ego's still recovering. But regardless, me and Bill, so as we have gotten older, we haven't contacted each other as much. He sent me a birthday notice like 3 days late. First time in 10 years. It's all right. He's my best friend. But he got a mouthful, right? Because come June 13th, he's not getting nothing from me. But over the years, what has happened? Right? We think about it. You probably have best friends, right? Some intimacy tends to drift apart, and it actually begins to affect the way you think about your best friends. Do they care about you? Do you care about them? Do they love you? Can you trust? Just because there's a separation there. But nothing's really changed outside of life, and you've got to work on it. If you're struggling with this, you've got to continue to believe your best friend, wants the best for you. There was a relationship that was formed. This is what we're talking about, because we go through seasons that tend to rob our attention away from God, and it disrupts that intimacy, that flow of trust and faith. And today, the 2 seasons are suffering and cheerfulness. Could we not talk about 2 completely separate things? So here's our scripture video. It's just 1 verse, so it's real quick. James 5, verse 13.
Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise.
Sarah, you've really done a good job on these videos. I appreciate the work you've put behind the scenes on them. In all circumstances, connect to God. If I could summarize my encouragement to you, and I tend to walk the line of encouraging you, offering you strong suggestions in what you ought to do in your life and your relationship with God, to build your faith and your trust in Him as He's working behind the scenes and everything. Today, I want to cross that line to offering you some imperatives and some commands, and hopefully it'll be laid out pretty well as to why. Verse 13, is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise. Now, there's a lot here, actually, and if you look at the flow of this, we could break this up into 4 segments. Is anyone among you suffering? So James is like sifting through the crowd to find that person, because this person's not just jumping out. Is anyone among you suffering? He's looking for that one individual. Maybe this is you. Let that person pray. Is anyone cheerful? So now he's looking for the cheerful person. They tend to stand out a little bit better. A little bit more. You can tell by the smiles on their face. Let him or her sing praise. So 4 different segments there. 4 different, and that's how we're going to approach it. We're going to look at the first phrase, is anyone among you suffering? This is our circumstance number 1, connecting to God in suffering. I want you to also, I'm going to go back real quick. I want you to see the flow of this. Because I think this is important as we pull up a couple other passages here in a few minutes. Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise. I don't want you to lose sight of the way he didn't put cheerfulness first. And I think he did that on purpose. He put suffering first because I think there's a progression here that is laid out for you to follow to become in a state where you're connected to God and you are cheerful despite your suffering. Circumstance number 1 is suffering. Suffering, as it's described in the Greek, is enduring hardship or evil. Enduring hardship or evil. This is not a flash in life type of suffering. This isn't the guy cut me off in traffic and caused me to miss the green light type of suffering. This is, I lost my job and I'm not finding another one type of suffering. This is, my child hasn't called me for the holidays. I don't know how he or she is doing type of suffering. This is, my parents don't understand what I'm going through. I have no one to talk to. This is, I'm struggling with health issues I can't tell anyone, I don't want to tell anyone about, but my life is falling apart type of suffering. This is enduring. This is a season of suffering. Hardship or evil. Anything come to mind? And when we use this word suffering and we define it enduring hardship or evil, what comes to your mind as what James is talking about here? Like a death? Okay, personal? Whatever you're going through at the time. A death or a loss. It's going to be personal to you. In fact, it's going to be real personal to you. This is very interesting. Suffering can lead to loneliness. I want you to think about this. I want you to listen, but not for your sake, but also for the sake of those sitting next to you. When someone is sick, what do? We get on Facebook and we say, I had a cough, I think I'm dying, right? And we're looking for some sympathy. If I got a sniffle, I call my wife up, I said, this is the end, I love you, it's been nice knowing you, good luck with the kids. Why? I want a little bit of love. I want a back rub. I'm looking for a little bit of attention. All right, when we're sick, we tend to, not all of us, we tend to open ourselves up to people to come in and usher in the sympathy and the empathy that we all long for, the validation we cherish and desire in life, the love that we are designed to have. Plus, you can't blame your sickness on anyone unless your kid goes to nursery and Monday they get sick and then it's the church's fault, right? And then you pull back for 3 months because you don't want your kid to get sick. I get it, right? But for the most part, when we're sick, we really don't have anyone to blame. It just happens. But when you suffer, suffering tends to be at the hands of each other. We tend to trigger suffering in one another. Your financial crisis would probably go away if someone would hire you or that person didn't fire you. I mean, if that doctor didn't miss that diagnosis, maybe you would be on medication that would take care of that issue. If those people would stop gossiping about you, you can go out in public again. Suffering. It is, we tend to retreat when we suffer. And I ask myself the question, why? And all I can do is identify in my life because I blame people for my suffering. And so I retreat naturally out of defense because I don't want to suffer more. Right? I open myself up to someone to try to explain myself to them, and maybe you've done this and they just don't understand. They heap advice or scripture or this or that on you, and it becomes more of a burden. You know, you want someone to listen. Maybe this is why a dog is man's best friend. And they just talk back out of good intentions. But it seems to make the suffering all the heavier. So the natural reaction is to retreat. And what happens? We begin to deal with our suffering through means of what I would call the flesh. We begin to, from Galatians chapter 5, sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissension, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, things like these. The flesh is trying to solve the problems of the flesh. And yet all those things seem to lead to what? More suffering. And all those things seem to take place in places of darkness. And so the person next to you may not just be suffering with suffering, but also loneliness, which has cut that person off from a body of believers and to receive what that person needs. Validation, to know they are cherished, to know they are important, to know they have purpose in life. It's a cycle that defeats itself, and it feeds on itself, and it has to be broken. And James puts it pretty clearly and pretty plainly. Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Let him pray almost sounds like it's a suggestion. It doesn't come any stronger of a command than what you see in the Greek. James is saying you have to pray. I like to put it out like you should pray, to encourage you to pray, but I don't see... James is saying, he's closed his book out as hard as he could. You have to pray. You have to pray. If you are in a season of darkness, if you are in a season of suffering, if you are in a season of fill in the blank of what that suffering is, you are enduring hardship and evil, you have to pray. You have to. Even if it's an exercise that you don't fully believe in, you need to do it. This is what will break the cycle of suffering, not in your circumstance, but in your mind, in your heart, and in your spirit. Because suffering will captivate you. It will imprison you. And your circumstance may never change, but your perspective on it and what you know to be true can and will begin to change when you begin to talk to the one who is in control. Connecting in suffering requires prayer. God promises to never leave you or forsake you. He is listening. His ear is attentive. Even if it's an exercise at first, God, life sucks. I don't know what to do. It's too much. Maybe that's all you've got. Begin it. Begin it. Hopefully, prayer becomes the instinctive response when you begin to endure hardship. That you begin to actually pray without ceasing, as Paul indicates, seems to be possible in life. That it is an instinctive response when hardship overcomes you. You pray. In fact, what will begin to happen is you will begin to be able to see the suffering in others and pray for them instinctively. You will begin to move outside of your world and begin to see naturally that other people are suffering and they need to be prayed for. Look, I don't do this well, personally. It is something I work on daily. I had something happen this week I want to use it as an illustrative purpose. I almost don't want to use it. I don't want to prop myself up as like, I've got this. But this happened this week. I thought it was really cool, and I feel like God allowed me to be a part of it to share it with you. I am out bush hogging the Vieira Hospital field, back and forth for 2 hours out in the dust. I am enduring hardship. It is hot. I don't have a canopy on my tractor. I'm breathing in dust. My allergy medicine is on full force. Snot's coming down. The phone's ringing. Beck, I'm dying out here, type of stuff. And I see the security guard. All right, so I'm bush hogging next to the helicopter pad. I see the security guard come out and unlock the gate to the helicopter pad. Now, I know helicopters don't need a gate, right? They just kind of fly in. So something's going to happen in this helicopter pad. No helicopters there. Nothing's going on outside of a security guard walking up and unlocking a gate. And my gut reaction was, God, someone's life is changing at this moment. I don't know who it is. I don't know what it is. I need just be with them. Whatever is going on, whatever the call was that caused that guard to go unlock that gate, I'm asking that you be part of the situation. That's all I had. It gave me something to do, but I noticed it. And sure enough, the first flight helicopter came in and landed, and as it was landing, I saw an ambulance leave the hospital. Shortly later, the ambulance came back, pulled into the helicopter pad. Someone was being transported out to Orlando. I could tell by the way the stretcher, I'm a tenth of a mile away, but I could just tell by looking at the stretcher and where the equipment was, this was a young person, because there's equipment where the feet should be or whatnot. Yeah, I just thought it was a child or whatnot. So, God, okay, some parent out there is going through something right now. Once again, I ask that you step in. And they fly the child out and whatnot, and I just prayed. That's all I got. And it came to be that young boy or girl that fell into the rhinoceros pen at Brevard Zoo. That was who was being flown out at the time. I don't know if you heard the story or whatnot, and it sounds like he or she will be okay. And I'd like to think that, God had me there for a reason to just simply lift them up in prayer along the way and whatnot. But this is what happens. When you start going through suffering and you begin to believe it has a purpose in your life, that God is working in you, that you begin to get out of your suffering and see a world full of suffering, and that you begin to engage the Father at the behalf of your brothers and sisters. You know how much work goes into mining gold? Anyone here watch Gold Rush? How many tons and tons and tons of dirt they have to move to get little specks of gold out of the ground? It is a lot of work. And I feel like suffering is similar to this, where there is it is a labor to endure suffering, but God has lined it with gold. The beauty of your faith growing during suffering. But there's another element, aspect, perspective to suffering I've got to bring up, and it will be heavy for some of you to bear. Suffering is God's call to some of you to connect back to Him. He wants to connect to you. It is very clear in Scripture that God now lives in you. He doesn't live in temples. How does that work, right? He's in heaven. He's in you. What's the deal? The Spirit of God Himself, the life of God Himself resides in you thanks to the empty tomb, thanks to the cross. We have the life of God within us. He wants to dwell in you. He wants the intimacy. And some of you, if you're being foolish and are walked away, Hebrews 10 talks about the discipline of a father and how it's love on you. I've got to bring up this perspective. Proverbs 1, Luke read this at our teen retreat. I thought this was fascinating, verse 22 to about the end. Let me read the whole thing. A little bit heavy to hear at some points, but listen to it. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will you scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? How long? If this refers to you, how long? How much more time is going to pass that you're going to enjoy the corruption of this world and what it doesn't have to provide you? How much longer? If you turn at my reproof, if you turn at my discipline, behold, I will pour out my Spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. What is God's reproof? What form will it come in? What is the discipline of God? Now we gotta be careful. I'm gonna burn the clock a little bit longer than I want to, but discipline and punishment, you've got to separate to do. Punishment is paying for something. Discipline is calling you to a place you need to be at in life. Punishment is paying for a wrong that you did, and no one else is paying for it except you. This is not what reproof is. Discipline is calling you back to a place you should have never left. And that is the house of God, the shelter of the Most High. This is where fools live, outside of this shelter. What's the reproof? It's gonna endure, it's gonna involve some type of suffering, hardship. I have called you and you refuse to listen. I've stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. Okay, that throws me for a loop. I'm going to take it at face value. Here's a person who is living a foolish life, is not listening to the reproof, the discipline of God, thumbs their nose at God. I'm going to do this my way. Romans 1 talks about this in a different perspective. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, well, then you'll call upon me. I won't answer. It's heavy, man. But you ask the question, why is the person calling upon the Lord now? They're just tired of suffering. They're not listening to counsel. They're not looking to escape in faith. They just get me out of this moment. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would have none of my counsel, despise all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. I had to read the whole thing to get to this verse. Whoever listens to me will dwell secure and be at ease, without dread of disaster. You see what happened here? This person who listened, suffering didn't leave. They came to a new perspective in life, a new knowledge that they are okay, even though the world is full of disaster around them. They are fine. They are okay. They are at ease. They are at peace. They are, back to Galatians 5, a couple verses later, they are full of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Suffering may be God's call for you to come back to Him and be in the place that you're missing. Full of hatred, full of bitterness, full of strife. I'm sure your life is not the way you want it. I'm sure there's heaviness in your life. The Father's calling you back. Listen. Listen. And turn. How do you do that? Pray. Just talk to Him. Talk to Him and just, I say believe, like talk and believe. If you're talking to Him, you're exhibiting belief, right? It's hard to not believe and yet talk to someone you don't see. Pray. If you're suffering, you gotta pray. You gotta pray. Number one. That's step one. Don't pick up the phone and start complaining to someone. That's that bitterness and strife. It feeds the cycle. It will never end. It will only lead you down a darker path. Break the cycle and pray. Let's flip the coin over. If anyone's cheerful, I almost said, man, let's not end here, but let's do it. Is anyone cheerful? I am. Is anyone cheerful? Gene is. Joyce is. You got so much you got to say, don't you? The Winds Bible Study is Tuesdays. I'll be bush hogging for a reason. Is anyone cheerful? That's the second circumstance. Cheerfulness. Cheerfulness. I want you to help me. Help me. What is life like when you are cheerful? What is life like? Go ahead, Gene. Peace. Why are you at peace? What's going on in life to bring in peace? Depression is gone. What's going on in life to make you cheerful? Bids are coming in and they're landing. It's full of cheerfulness for us. And then I said, send them again. Hey, the second time was half the price. I mean, you got it, right? Yes? Getting to watch football this evening. Hold on. So, I led you down this path. I knew you'd eventually get there. Why is watching football with a friend lead to cheerfulness?
Because having somebody with you always makes it better, more exciting, you know.
That's what you want in life, isn't it? I mean, to have someone by you and watch.
You're in your house by yourself, jumping up and down.
Awesome. All right. Hey, when the weather's 76 and the humidity level's in the 40 percentile and the Good Country song comes on, the windows go down. So this was last night. This is when Connor shamed us, my family, my 10-month-old. My 10-month-old. We are out North Florida looking at some property. We head back and we decide to eat at a gas station for dinner. The Flying J 524, the best food. I'm telling you, man, Grant, you should have got the pizza. Pizza's awesome. And we're there, we eat pizza, whatnot, we're having a good time. They had Wendy's, and we head back, and we turn on the country music, and I don't know, it was a Brett Young song or something. We started singing too, and there's this one spot where we all hit the note, you know, and we just held it. Me, Anna, and Becca just held the note as loud as we could. We were all different notes, very not harmonious. And Connor doesn't cry in his car. He just doesn't cry. I mean, he laughs, he giggles, he sucks his thumb. But as soon as we hit that note, all different, he just busted out crying. Yeah, took the cheerfulness right out of us. I said, Becca, why is he crying? Because we can't sing. But life was good. I mean, everything, the word harmonious comes to mind. Everything is working together. So if you're cheerful, the same thrust that we had with prayer, it's the same thrust we have with sing praise. You got to sing praise. You won't put the weight on that as you would prayer, because suffering we want to get out of. But cheerfulness, this is interesting. We don't talk about this much, but if we don't talk about it, you can be led astray, actually back into the cycle of suffering. Who's orchestrating your life? Who's led you to a place of cheerfulness? Who has brought the friend over and the football game on? Who has led us there? Who's the orchestrator? What does harmony mean? When we talk about music, this is from the Bing definition, number 1. The combination of simultaneously sounded musical notes to produce chords and chord progressions having a pleasing effect. So Matt, according to that, on your guitar, when you're playing a chord, you're playing actually a bunch of different notes. And if you're doing it, so you're playing a G, a D, and a C together to make a C chord, and it comes together, right? And it's the theory. And then you have harmony. All right, and when things are working, separate things are working together to produce a good sound. I mean, think about this. Cheerfulness is like a bunch of different notes coming together to produce a beautiful sound. Your life is everything's coming together to produce a beautiful life. It's awesome. I don't think it's any fault. Why did he say, hey, if you're cheerful, give thanksgiving to God? I believe he uses sing praise to tie into what is going on naturally in you. Everything is harmonious. In fact, you might find yourself singing. You might find yourself whistling. You might find yourself just dancing to the beat, because the harmony of life, which is orchestrated by God. This is where cheerfulness begins.